All right, two warm-up problems today, so go ahead and find the GCF of the monomials. Pause the video, see how you do, and then come back and see if you got them right. All right, so we have our GCF here in number 1, which is going to be 6x. So notice when I write all the factors out of 6, I get 1, 2, 3, and 6. When I write all the factors out of 18, I get 1, 2, 3, 6, 9, and 18. So I underline these common factors, but we want the greatest common factor, so that's going to be the 6 here. So 6 is part of my GCF. And then when we have extra variables, we just see what's in both. So I have x, xy here, and xz. So what is in both? Well, there's an x in both, so then the x is part of my greatest common factor. If there are like 2 x's in each of one of them, then you would say they each have an x squared, and so on. Number 2, all my factors of 15, all my factors of 40. I see that common factors are actually only 1 and 5. So 5 becomes part of my greatest common factor. And then I look to see what's the same with letters. I see an x here and an x there. So x becomes part of my answer. I see a y and a y. And then I see a z and a z. So x, y, z is part of my greatest common factors there. There's an x in both, there's a y in both, and there's a z in both. All right, so now you're going to see us kind of bringing back some Unit 7 material with these trinomials, and where you want to factor them by finding the greatest common factor in them. So when you do this, there's kind of 2 different ways to do it. There's the shortcut, and there's kind of what you're thinking. So I'm going to write out kind of the long process here of what you're thinking when you're doing these problems. So when I see a 3x squared, a 6x, and a 3, what I have to do for each of these is factor it, just like we did in the warm-up in problems 1 and 2. So 3, I'm going to get a 1 and a 3 as factors, and then an x and an x. My next term here, right, there's my 3, there's my 6, x, and actually, you know what, I probably should write it like this, just so it's a little bit clearer there. I'll put the 3x squared and then the 6x. So to factors of 6 are going to be 1. It's exactly like if you look at number 1. 1, 2, 3, and 6. And then we've got 1x there. And then the last thing I have is 3, which is just going to be 1 and 3. So let's find our common factors. So there's a 1 in all 3 of these. There's a 3 in all 3 of these. So then we get, and I see 2 x's, 1 x, and no x's. So actually my GCF here is just going to be 3, and that's it. So what we want to do here is we want to factor by taking out a 3. We're going to kind of undistribute. So if my problem is 3x squared plus 6x plus 3, then we want to take a 3 out of each one of those. So we want to divide by 3, divide by 3, divide by 3. And so my answer is going to be x squared plus 6 divided by 3 is 2, so 2x plus 1. And then don't forget that 3 just doesn't disappear. We do have to undistribute it. So you can kind of see here how this looks, right? If this is my final answer, and then we basically just undistributed or pulled out that 3. So we could, if we wanted to, we could distribute the 3, and then we'd end up with our original answer. So when we talk about factoring something, we're talking about kind of undistributing it, taking something out, instead of distributing it and putting something into it. So this is what our final answer will look like today. So we're just pulling something out. We're pulling out our greatest common factor. So you'll notice that greatest common factor just sitting on the outside. So we have another problem. And so going back to this one real quick, if you don't need to do this, that's fine, right? If you can look at this and say, oh, I see all of them have a 3, sweet. Just take out a 3. But note that we might not be done if we don't take out greatest common factor. If we just take out a factor, then we might not quite be done. So let's take a look at the next one. What goes into, okay, what can I undistribute, or what can I take out of each one of these? And if you have an answer, if you're like, oh, it's blank, then do it. If not, then yeah, you probably have to do this part of the problem to make sure you understand it. So I'm going to look at that, and I'm going to say, hey, I see a 6. So I can divide each of these parts by 6. And when I divide each of them by 6, I get a negative x squared minus 18 divided by 6 is 3, so minus 3x, and 24 divided by 6 is going to be 4. And that looks done, but there is one more thing I can take out, and that's actually that negative 1, right? So I can take out and make this a negative 6, and then that'll change everything to positive, since it's all negative. Because negative 1 divided by a negative 1 is positive 1. A negative 3 divided by a negative 1 is a positive 3, and a negative 4 divided by a negative 1 is positive 4. So here's my answer for this one. Just a real quick sidebar here. If right away you said, well, let's take out a negative 3. I know there's a negative 3 in both of them. And you got 2x squared plus 3x, plus 18 divided by 3, 6x plus 8. And you're like, oh, that's what my answer is. Notice that that's a fine first step, but you got to take it one step further, and you have to divide out a 2 as well. So then you divide out a negative 3 times 2 on the outside and get x squared plus 3x plus 4. And then what is negative 3 times 2? Just a negative 6. So note, you do get to the same answer. It might take you a couple steps. So if you take out a common factor, right? So 3 is a common factor of these numbers. In fact, this is a really good problem to look at, right? 3 is a common factor. It's just not the greatest common factor. So you create more work on yourselves by taking out a common factor. You're much better off just taking out that GCF right away to make your lives easy. All right, do number 5 on your own. See how you do. Come back and see if you got it right. All right, I worked this problem through. I found out that 5 was my GCF. So now we got to take out 5 from each of these. So 10 divided by 5 is going to give me 2. 20 divided by 5 is going to give me 4. And 35 divided by 5 will give me 7. So here's my final answer here. So remember, whatever we take out, whatever our GCF is, then we just divide that from each of the numbers. So 10 divided by 5, 20 divided by 5, and 35 divided by 5. All right, there we are. Tomorrow we'll add just a little bit more difficulty to this one, but that's all we got right now.